Congressman-elect George Santos was exposed last month for fabricating his education and work credentials, and now he's on the hook for a crime he allegedly committed over a decade ago in Brazil. According to the New York Times, Brazilian prosecutors plan to recharge the newly elected Republican this week with fraud. Court documents show that in 2008, Santos spent $700 in a shop in Rio using a stolen checkbook and fake name.
Authorities in Brazil suspended the case after they failed to find Santos, who fled to the U.S. after being charged and then was elected to Congress. But given his rise in publicity here, they now know where he is. He's in the House of Representatives, and they're going to go after him. Santos is also facing local and federal investigations for having lied about his resume, but he carried on business as usual in Washington, showing up to the 118th Congress's swearing in on Tuesday and casting a vote in the House speakership race.
Yeah, we've kind of understated the level of lying in that intro there because, I mean, just to recap, he lied about his mother dying in 9/11, subsequently talked about her dying of cancer on Christmas. He lied about his race.
He claimed that she died
from 9/11. Right. So they're not entirely contradictory statements, but the implication of dying from 9/11 is clearly he has at one point claimed to be Jewish and later revised and said, I'm Jewish, which my Jewish friends loved joking about over the holidays.
It's a very Seinfeld kind of thing.
You know, at one point there was a tweet where he claimed to be half black, half white. Who knows? I mean, those things aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. There are, Malcolm Gladwells and people like that out there in the world. But the point is that there has been such a jumble of lies that have not stopped, including people pointed out that he released a statement saying that he had been sworn into Congress. Of course, because of all of the mishigas going on with Kevin McCarthy, nobody has been sworn into Congress. I don't know if that was just an administrative mistake. Yeah. The letter was going to go out and nobody stopped it. But it does.
I think that one's forgivable.
It's a funny little cherry on top of all of this.
Yes. So there was a lot of footage, obviously, of the vote going down in the House yesterday, and he looked pretty friendless, pretty lone. Not exactly the belle of the ball.
Nobody would talk to him. Everyone avoided him like the plague. I think there was one Congress member who went up and started talking to him, and it was clear that as soon as he introduced himself and the congressperson knew who he was, pivoted and got out of there like quick as they possibly could.
Well, one former member of Congress who had a lot to say to George Santos was Tulsi Gabbard, who grilled him about his slew of lies when she filled in for conservative host Tucker Carlson on Fox News late last week. Here's a little bit of that exchange.
A lie is not an embellishment on a resume. You said you worked at Goldman Sachs and Citigroup, but they've said, we've got no record of this guy working for us. You've said you've gone to and graduated from these universities, but they've said, well, we've got no record of that. These are blatant lies, and it calls into question how your constituents and the American people can believe anything that you may say when you are standing on the floor of the House of Representatives, supposedly fighting for them. That's the real issue here.
Well, look, I agree with what you're saying, and as I stated, and I continue, we can debate my resume and how I worked with firms such as Goldman and Citigroup.
Is it debatable, or is it just false?
No,
is it debatable, or is it just false?
No, it's not false at all. It's debatable. I can sit down and explain to you what you can do in private equity, in capital intro, via servicing limited partners and general partners. And we can have this discussion that's going to go way above the American people's head. But that's not what I campaigned on. I campaigned on delivering results for the American people by lowering inflation. I can sit down, and if you want to have that discussion, I'd be glad to, Tulsi, to explain that to you and make sure that we settle the score.
I love that the response to, did you lie about going to college? Did you lie about getting these degrees? Was, look, if you want me to explain about derivatives, I can explain about derivatives, as though that's the point. And you really got to give Tulsi a lot of credit.
She flayed him living. Yeah. I don't know if he thought that because it's Fox and Fox it has a lot of conservative personalities, that they would be friendlier to him as a Republican. I don't know that Tucker would have been any friendlier than her, but she was really great. She was really great.
She was giving, I'm sorry, like Democratic primary 2019 vibes when she destroyed Kamala Harris on the debate stage. She has that thing that's like a high tolerance for awkwardness or something, like a high tolerance for confrontation, where a lot of people, when their prey starts flipping on the line and getting kind of wiggly, they'll back off. They think, okay, we got him. Everyone sees what's happening. She will drill down and give follow-up question after follow-up question. Santos at one point tried to argue, well, look, I have problems, but look at what Joe Biden has done. The Democrats are even worse. And Tulsi, to her credit, despite this kind of ideological transition, or at least partisan transition that she's in, I was like, that is not the point. This is not a conversation we're having right now about criticism of Democrats. We can criticize Democrats all day and night. That was an easy out for her, especially in the context of this Fox News program. She said, no, you ran on various promises and commitments to the people of your district. You are accountable to them outside of what the Democratic Party is doing. And honestly, I wish we saw more of that advocacy for constituents and voters more often on television.
It is true that, George Santos is not the first person to tell lies and become elected to Congress. Many people tell lies while they're in Congress.
Sure.
There's been serial resume inflation, even on the part of very high-profile political figures who are still, in the good graces of the mainstream and elites, including Joe Biden himself and Hillary Clinton and everybody else, Donald Trump, of course. So much of that going on. So maybe it's interesting. I guess his are so blatant, or we're so immediately contradicted that this has become a recurring story, or not a quickly fading away story.
Yeah.
Or it's interesting to people in some way, but this is not the exception. This is the norm. Yeah,
it's also a little weird that there is so much energy behind this, and that Democrats seem to have been able to stick the landing on making this guy a pariah when they couldn't do it at all with Donald Trump, despite a lot of very obvious lies, disprovable statements, et cetera. And I don't know what it is. Is it the volume of the lying from Trump, the fact that he had a lot of charisma that George Santos just simply does not have, the fact that he never apologized or kind of admitted anything that was wrong. Donald Trump was an amazing case study at how doubling down and pushing forward can get you out of a lot of traditional media cycles of accountability and kind of public embarrassment. I don't know what's going on, but it is remarkable how no one really is trying to defend George Santos at this point, and how much traction this story has gotten with normies. I was writing a cab the other day. Yes, I was writing a cab the other day, listening to a story on the radio. This woman was playing a news story about the McCarthy stuff. And she turns it down, completely unrelated to what was happening on the radio. And it's like, have you heard about this George Santos thing?
Oh.
I was like, what? I mean, yes. And she seemed to just be...
Cab driver penetration. That's you can't argue with that.
Yeah. It's wild. Whatever Democrats are doing, they're doing right, and they should take a lesson from this. But if the lesson is just George Santos is that wild of a candidate, I don't know that there's a lot to take.
Well, but they should have done it 6 months ago.
Yeah, they should have. Now, some of the story, the part of the story where people asked the question why the media didn't get on this earlier, and the New York Times, I believe it was New York Times writers responded, well, why don't you go and do some reporting? I mean, there clearly was some negligence here. Apparently, his opponent was given a file that contained this information that kind of buried deep. I don't know if 25 pages or so is what you would call it buried deep.
Yeah, it was a comms failing on the part of that Democrat staffer. And apparently, a local news had covered this in some detail, but it just didn't get any pickup.
Yeah,
which is interesting.
That's a whole other story about the limitations of and lack of funding that local news gets. But I'm sure there'll be more on this George Santos saga, and we'll continue to follow it right here on Rising. More after this.